Being a parent of a child struggling with their mental health can feel overwhelming. What do I say? What do I do? What tools are available? What resources are out there? It can feel as if a million unanswered questions are circling your brain and you don't know where to start or who to talk to. Welcome to Normalize the Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Regeter, and today I'm joined by a mom of a daughter battling an eating disorder and the author of Bloodlines, a memoir, Tracey Yokas. In this episode, Tracey shares her journey of realizing that to help her daughter heal from an eating disorder, she first had to heal herself. Through conversations with her daughter, overcoming her own body insecurities, and developing effective coping skills, Tracey found a path to healing. She shares advice to other parents facing similar challenges, emphasizing the importance of self-care and open communication. Tracey, thank you so much for joining me today. I am very excited for our conversation, but before we begin, I just want to check in. How are you really?
Well, I appreciate that question. And to be honest, this month has been pretty stressful for me, more stressful than normal. My memoir came out after working on it for 10 years. So it was kind of a big deal. And it's just a lot of work getting a book into the world and trying to, get people interested in it and work on it and get the word out and all the things. So it's been a month where I've definitely had to kind of increase my, increase my self-care.
Congratulations. That is amazing. 10 years in the making. Oh my goodness. I'm so
Yeah,
excited for you. Tell us a
thank you.
little bit more about your memoir.
Thank you. It is about the journey. Predominantly, the main storyline is the journey we went on when my daughter was a teenager and was diagnosed with an eating disorder and severe depression. But also, intercut with that are scenes from my childhood that I hope kind of will help people understand that, you know, we can do our absolute best as parents and love our children, and we can still have old patterns and habits that were handed down to us in terms of our parenting that just don't help. And so, kind of accepting that and understanding those patterns and working on them is one of the best things we can do to help our kids through their journey, because we really can't control someone else's illness, but we can control our reactions to it.
Absolutely. And that is such an important conversation to have. I mean, my parents, I can say for my mom specifically, I was diagnosed with an eating disorder with anorexia. I think I was 17, about to turn 18 in college. And looking back on it, my mom had no idea what to do. I was afraid to talk to her about it. I remember the day I was at the infirmary because I wasn't feeling well, and they ran blood work and they were like, "You look very thin. Tell me about what you're eating. Tell me about your workout routine. Tell me about how you feel." And they were like, "We're gonna monitor your blood work every 3 weeks. Your kidneys are starting to shut down." I was losing color and patches on my skin, and they had me meet with a nutritionist once a week. They were monitoring with my dining hall pass that I was going in and making sure I was going in 3 times a day. And I'm very grateful the school did that, but I didn't talk to my mom about it until years later because I was so afraid. Growing up, I struggled a little bit with my body image, and looking back at it, she also really struggled, and she would tell me comments that maybe my grandmother would make to her other people, and she would then project some of that onto me. So if I was eating maybe a second serving of a sandwich. I was eating a second sandwich. She would start to panic a little bit because I needed to be small enough to be a flyer, was a competitive cheerleader. And the messages that were told to her, she was repeating back to me. So then when I got into that position, I was like, I'm afraid to reach out. She doesn't know what to say. And it was a really difficult journey for both of us to navigate.
Well, exactly. Thank you for sharing that. It mirrors, not exactly, but very closely some things that my daughter and I experience too, which is, again, talking about the patterns that get handed down. I have a very complicated, my mother has now passed away. And in fact, her unexpected death was a trigger for one of them, for my daughter's illness. And I have a very complicated relationship with my own body, my weight, body image, and culturally. I mean, we're just up against it, and there's no easy answers for that. So I was terrified when I had my daughter that she would end up having the same relationship with her body, and that we would have the same relationship, meaning not be that close because I wasn't that close with my mother as I grew up. And I did not know what to do about that. I certainly didn't talk to my mother about it because I kind of recognized that a lot of the unhealthy patterns came from there. So I did what I think a lot of people do, which is try to do the opposite of what was done to me. So that meant trying to not talk about my daughter's body, not talk about food, not whatever. But I think that's still an unconscious choice. And we can end up repeating the dynamic because we're just in our mind doing something opposite, which may seem hard to understand, but the opposite can also end up having the same kind of energetic effect. And the only way that we were quote unquote lucky with my daughter's illness is that she was 13. So she was much younger than you were. And she was living at home and in our sight all the time. So when her eating patterns changed, what they changed very abruptly, we were quite aware of it and got her into therapy quickly. Um, but yeah, I mean, we didn't know how to talk about it. So she was in therapy. I immediately got into therapy, and our journey sort of devolved actually from there. So there's a lot more, to that story. But just to back up what you're saying, I think this is why conversations like this are so important because people don't know. Because generations, my generation, generations older than me, and even one or two after me, that don't have good role models about this stuff. And we don't know what to say. And we're afraid of making things worse.
Yeah, that fear of making things worse is something that my parents really struggled with because they reacted out of fear because they loved me so much. So it was, "Why are you doing this?" And I was in the psych ward, "What's wrong with you? I can't believe you would try to hurt yourself." And it was just a place of fear. They were scared and they didn't know what to say. And then they kind of just didn't want to talk about it and brushed it all under the rug. And we're just going to move on from it. And it wasn't intentional to just minimize it or diminish what I was going through. It was, I don't know what to say. I'm afraid. So let's just pretend like it didn't happen so that we can all move forward. And I'm looking back, I really am curious to my parents what that experience was like emotionally for them. So, as a mother, what was that experience like for you watching your daughter start to struggle?
Well, it's devastating. I will say, echoing again everything you just said about we did not, we really didn't brush it under the rug because it was so in our face. I mean, our entire lives kind of flipped on a dime. So one day like life was normal and then the next day life was pretty much chaos and it was almost that fast. So, yes, I mean, there was no chance to kind of ignore it, but we certainly did walk around in fear and on eggshells all day long, not knowing what to do, not knowing what to say, not knowing how to support her. And add to that the dynamics that I learned in my childhood, which compelled me to feel like I had to fix this situation, like it was my responsibility, and was somehow, even though rationally I knew it wasn't in my power, I still felt like I'm supposed to be doing something here. So, yes, of course, we're supposed to be doing something, but it was a very unhealthy, overwhelming, gripping sensation that I needed to control this. And of course, the first advice you get is, give up the control issues, don't have power dynamic struggles. And so it's like, everybody's just walking around the house like this because at any moment, all kinds of things could go awry. And similarly, with our daughter, she did begin self harming. So there was disordered eating, there was severe depression, which led to self harm. And so it was an escalating of behaviors on her end, which so trying to say this carefully, I do not feel like that was my fault or it was my husband's fault because I don't look at illness as anyone's fault. But I do want to say that because we had such difficulty with our own reactions, um, I think that didn't help the situation at all is what I'm trying to say. We did not have good coping mechanisms. I had no routine of self-care, and in fact didn't feel like I was entitled to engage in self-care while my daughter was sick. We just didn't know how to take care of ourselves. And so we were so focused on the behavior, this behavior that was hurting her, hurting us, hurting the family, hurting her life, taking away her future. We thought all of these things that we kind of got lost in not understanding. I mean, it's like we knew there was something causing it, but we were so focused on the behaviors and trying to get the behaviors to stop that kind of all of us coming together in a way that was more helpful to understand what was behind those behaviors kind of got lost in the mix predominantly, as you've pointed out, because of the fear. And, fear is normal. Let me just say, of course, it's a normal reaction when your child stops eating, when their behaviors are threatening their life, when they're saying they wish they had never been alive, things like this. Fear is completely normal reaction. But it also, as we know, doesn't help us get to where we need to be to support ourselves or the people that we love.
I think it's really common for parents to not have those tools in place to care for themselves. I mean, older generations did not talk about it. Gen Z, we're really starting to talk about it more. And yet, most of us still aren't equipped with the tools we need. And it's really hard when you grew up in a world where, especially women, we don't get to take time for self care and ourselves. Our job is to take care of everyone else. And then when you're taking care of someone and they're struggling and it's outside of your control, it's really, really hard because I mean, something my mom always says is she wants to fix it. When she sees that little bit of tears pulling into my eyes, a little bit of water, she's like, all she wants to do is fix it. And when it's something outside of her control that she can't fix, it's the hardest thing in the world for her. And she doesn't know how to manage that or cope with that. So it's really hard when everything's happening and you care so much and you can't control it and you don't know what to do to be able to show up for yourself in those moments so that you can begin to learn what to do because learning what to do is so hard, especially with all these mixed messages that we're seeing online of what you should do or should say or shouldn't say. And it's so unique to each person. It's really overwhelming. And without that basis or foundation of something you can do to support yourself through it, to be able to catch your breath so that you can begin is so hard.
Well, I mean, you just made so many really good and important points. Yes, yes, and yes. My therapist asked me for a year and a half, I want to say, at least, because I was so incapable of taking care of myself. Like every single session, every week, she was like, well, what can you do to take care of yourself? And I mean, first of all, I completely missed the point that she was wanting me to do what I was wanting my daughter to do, right? I mean, we all wanted each other to take care of ourselves, but there was just like that, phew, I mean, it completely went over my head. And I was like, what are you talking about? I mean, we've got a major problem on our hands. We've got to be, dealing with this. And, it was really, oof, it was a lot and hard. And finally, like a year and a half later, I was like, I bubbled up that I really do need to find a way that I can take care of myself, do something for me. All the cliches are sort of sadly true, because we always like poo poo a cliche, but we really do need to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first, fill up our tank, whatever way you want to look at it. And so I returned to a regular creative practice with art that has literally transformed my life. But back then, to your point about not knowing what to do and wanting to fix everything, that is really such an unhealthy dynamic. And it doesn't actually help the person we want to help. So, one of the first things I did have to learn how to do was regulate my nervous system so that when my daughter was dysregulated, I could at least stay more calm and not fly off the handle myself, like, oh my God, all the things, and be just a calm energy and not try to fix anything, be able to witness her pain without taking it on myself, without jumping in to fix it. This sounds like it should be easy, But, for anyone listening who is living this story right now, they will know it is so not easy, but it is so important because it's the thing that creates that space that's necessary for, in our particular situation, for my daughter to be able to be her own self and have the experiences that she was experiencing, for me to not get pulled into that. In other words, to be like a safe space for her to land and to know, like, that I could support her without trying to change her experience, deny her experience, all the things that that fixing can feel like, because we know obviously the intention behind it and what the person receives are two different things. So our parental intention, of course, is to help and to care and whatever, but that's not what the other person receives when we're out of control and we're trying to fix it and we can't stay calm and we can't talk about anything, or we deny it, or, all these things that are habituated patterns that we probably learned a really long time ago.
Yeah, and it's really hard, I mean, as the child to feel like your parents don't understand because, like you said, what you mean and what the kid's receiving can be very, very different. And I think that's something that was very real for my parents, where they were reacting out of fear. They wanted to help and they didn't want me to feel ashamed or embarrassed. So they didn't want to talk about it. Now, I will say my dad brought me to therapy and made me sit there every day for the hour, whether or not I wanted to go in there. And if he couldn't take me, he had my grandmother take me, or one of my younger cousins would actually come and sit there with me. And she would just sit in the waiting room every day. And that way I had to be there. And someone was there to see whether or not I went in. So they showed up in the ways that they felt like was appropriate, in a way that they wanted me to get that support without having to talk about it. And as I hear you talk, I realized so much that it was that they didn't want me to feel embarrassed or ashamed, and they didn't know what to say, so it wasn't how I received it back then as they don't care, that they don't really love me, like, those little messages that I internalized back then are really just my misinterpretation of the way they were approaching it, because they were doing what they can with the very limited information, tools, and amount of fear and emotional dysregulation and all of it that they were experiencing at once, and feeling so disconnected because other people weren't talking about it, because they didn't have a support system going through it. They had to figure it out on their own and how to manage all of it on their own, which must have been really, really difficult for them.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that because I think that's something that comes with age is more insight. I mean, my daughter is now 25 years old, and so we have been able, she's read my book, of course, and supports. I wouldn't talk about it if I didn't have her support, but I mean, we've been able to have a completely different sort of dialogue now that she's older, than we had then. And exactly, I mean, we're all filtering things through, our life experiences, through how we learned, all the things. And then when you add illness into the mix on top of everything, that's why it's so important to get professional help because of course we don't know what to do. I mean, how could we know what to do? So, we have to have reasonable expectations for our own selves. And a word about silence is many of us learned to not talk about things in a variety of ways when we were young for whatever reason. And silence, well, we know it can kill, first of all. So that's why these conversations are so important. But it can be one of the hardest habits to break is not talking about things. So if anyone's listening who is having trouble with that, I just want to validate when you've spent your whole life in a variety of ways getting the message that we're not to talk about things, we don't talk about those sort of things, or not even that's not even said because the conversation isn't even had that much. It's very, very difficult pattern, and it can feel breaking all of these patterns can feel like mini deaths. That sounds dramatic, but it's so hard. And discomfort is something we don't talk about enough when it comes to healing because we're like, oh, I'm going to heal and I'm not going to be uncomfortable anymore. Hmm, maybe. but, it kind of takes a little while, like a long time maybe to get to that point. We've been on this part of the journey with my daughter for 12 years, and first time I got into therapy I was 30, so that's 25 years ago. We just have to have, I think, a more realistic expectation about a healing journey, but understanding as soon as you get a glimpse of what's on the other side, the liberation and the freedom and the joy and the compassion for yourself and other people, the empathy that's on the other side of that journey, you won't want to turn back because you will understand finally what everybody's talking about with all this blah, 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 healing, blah, 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 toolkits, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it sounds like blah, blah, blah until you actually start to reap the benefit of it in your relationship with the people that you care about most and yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that realistic expectation of the healing journey is so important. I know for me, a big thing was learning to be comfortable with the discomfort, learning that it was going to be uncomfortable almost every single day because I was completely changing all of my behaviors. I was changing my thought processes. When it was struggling with my eating disorder, it was changing this whole idea of my relationship to my body and my relationship with food, which had been built inside me for so many years from competitive cheerleading. Then with depression, learning to rewrite those messages of I'm not good enough and the world is better without me, right? So changing everything I thought and believed about myself and the world was very scary. And learning that it was not going to be comfortable at all in any of it, especially in the beginning, was a big, big thing for me. I thought, "Okay, I'm just going." I don't know why I thought this way, but I thought I was gonna say, "I love my body, I wanna eat, and I was gonna be happy, I wanna be here, and it was gonna work." And when I snapped my fingers, it did not happen. Instead, it was I mean, I remember my mom took me to IHOP and made me eat chocolate chip pancakes. Was not the best way to approach it, but she was like, "Eat." And that was really uncomfortable for me to sit there and eat. First of all, I had not been eating carbs at all. I thought I couldn't have any carbs. And now suddenly there's a stack of pancakes in front of me, they're chocolate chip, and there's a bunch of people in the restaurant, right? So it was learning everything, building that relationship, every single aspect of it was uncomfortable. Some days it still is. I've gotten a lot more comfortable with the whole discomfort of it and started to accept more and more of the scary moments and the difficulties of it. But it's very uncomfortable. And there are so many moments of setbacks where you're like, I had, I want to say a couple months ago, where not even a couple months ago, maybe like, no, a couple months ago was March, where I had a day where I didn't eat anything at all. I was like, I hate my body, I hate the way I look. And I did not eat anything at all. And I felt so sick for days. I was eating maybe once a day a small salad. And I had to catch that and tell myself that it was okay that that happened again, but I caught it and now I can start making changes again without putting all that guilt on myself because that was really difficult. And then I hated myself. And then it's a really difficult process and it's not supposed to be easy. And just because it isn't easy doesn't mean you're not making progress. I feel like that
Well,
was so important.
exactly. It's a vicious cycle. I mean, I think what you're describing is the cycle that many of us get stuck in. It just might be with different circumstances. Like maybe I'm going to eat all day long, instead of not eat all day long because I'm stuck in a shame cycle or I'm stuck in my ruminating thoughts and I'm beating myself up and I'm completely in it. So I'm not conscious to necessarily what's happening. And to your point, it can take, days or weeks, or it doesn't take me that long anymore, but you can get stuck in that cycle for quite a while. And I sometimes think of shame inside us like an actual entity because it wants to live, right? I mean, like it wants to stay alive in there. It thinks it's serving a purpose. And all of these things really are designed, even though it sounds a little wacky, but they're coping mechanisms. They're designed, they come from a desire to protect us. It just doesn't end up turning out that way. So fighting that as is what we do when we don't know how to do anything different, actually entrenches the vicious cycle even further. And so, yes, becoming more conscious, first of all, that it's happening, becoming more compassionate with ourselves, more understanding, soothing ourselves, regardless of how long we did whatever we did, whatever. I mean, it does. That's why it takes a while, because there's kind of a lot of moving parts to it, and they're old business. That these can be patterns that actually came from beyond our parents. We're going back like to previous generations, and so there can be a lot to unravel. Um, but simply acknowledging, in whatever way works for you, like, softness, tenderness, empathy toward our own selves can make such a difference, because it's not the thing that we've done for forever.
Yes, that empathy for ourselves, creating that compassion. I know, first of all, that was really hard for me because I was living in a mindset of hating myself. And I know from my parents, conversations we've had since, it was really hard for them because they wanted to blame themselves. And when they started seeking ways to get me treatment and support and finding the right therapy, they had me in neurofeedback therapy 4 days a week and then psychotherapy once a week, and finding the right modality. And when something didn't work or something did work or the wrong therapist, they felt so guilty every single time. They didn't really have that compassion and grace with themselves of, we're figuring this system out on our own, because it's not an easy system to navigate. There's a lot of broken pieces of the system, and you just don't know what questions to ask until you're in it, until you see, oh, this was a question I could have asked. Now I know better. Now I know there's different modalities, because when someone's never talked about therapy, never gone to therapy, how are they supposed to know that there's different modalities that might work better with different mental health conditions, and it might work better with different symptoms or just with the person, their personality in general? So going through it, I they didn't have that compassion. I didn't have that compassion, and it made for a lot of tension within ourselves and with each other.
Well, exactly. I mean, really, and how can it not? And, it's such an important point to point out that I was doing a presentation recently, and just for fun, I like Googled, therapy. And there were like, by the time I got to C, there were like 50. So, if you don't have, as the parent, which most parents don't, and I had a master's degree in counseling psychology prior to my daughter becoming ill. So it's like I had some exposure to the system. And of course, I weaponized that against myself too, because to your point, I mean, when things go wrong, we'll tell ourselves all kinds of things. We should this, should that, all the things. But if there's 50 treatment modalities by the time you get to C, and you're someone who, hasn't worked in the system or been involved or know people who can help you navigate it, I mean, how would you possibly know what to do? So, yes, I mean, talking about it, it feels like it should be so easy to be like, of course I wouldn't know. Of course I'm entitled to tenderness. Of course, so is my sick child. But so many things again get in the way of that, and our frustration and our anger at the illness, at the system, and all the things at ourselves can so easily look like and feel like we're angry with our child. And, you know, that just makes us feel even worse, and on we go. So it's just all the reasons why it's so important, to your point, to have good quality people helping you navigate it. And yes, if the first couple times aren't a fit, it's not about beating yourself up. It's just about, that wasn't a good fit. Time for another choice till you find, what works for you and your family.
And it's not easy to find the right option. I mean, even finding a primary care doctor can take a while, right? Finding the right person in a relationship, finding the right friends, finding someone who can support you and help you receive the tools that you need, can offer you the kind of support, tools, information that you need, is not going to be super easy, and it might not happen the first time. or the 3rd time, or unfortunately the 10th time. It takes a while, and sometimes you find someone and they work for a while, and then all of a sudden you notice, "I outgrew this therapist and I need something else," or psychotherapy worked really well, but now I actually need something in addition or something else, and vice versa. So it's really important to recognize it's not your fault if it takes a while. The first relationship you had likely did not end up with the person you're marrying. It does actually happen, but not always, right? So just because you found someone that really helped you in the beginning doesn't mean that they're gonna be able to help you ever, and if you couldn't find the right person in the beginning, that's okay too. It's not your fault, and it's so important that we stop blaming ourselves because we didn't find the right therapist on the first time. Different personalities mix different together, different modalities work different for different people, and you just have, unfortunately, to keep trying till you find what works for you and what's right for you.
100%. 100%. And I just like to say that I think a lot of parents fall into a trap that we fell into also, which is even though rationally, I think I said this already, we know we can't control somebody else's illness, that's actually still what we want. And so part of why parents will bristle against some treatment is because they're just focused on like, we've got to solve this problem. Like, if you're into the lingo, like our kids become the identified patient, which I don't really like because the whole family is in the mix. Like illness is impacting everybody, but it can be like, I don't want to talk about myself. I don't want to talk about this stuff. I just want to get this problem, solved. I want, because of course we want our children to be healthy, all that stuff. But also there's a level of, because of the fear, because of the anger, because of all the emotions that can come up, it's like we're going to look outward to get the situation taken care of. And really, again, all we can control is ourselves. So I wish that that's something that I had been able to understand and accept faster in our journey, because it was preventing me from doing things like self care, from fully understanding all the ways I could be more supportive to my daughter. So, and again, I want to be clear, this isn't about the blame game in any way, shape, or form. It's about reality. We cannot control somebody else's illness. We can only control ourselves. So, how can we be open? How can we be receptive to hearing and doing the things that we might have to shift or change, like even communication patterns? I mean, how you talk to somebody might need to change now that there's an illness involved. That doesn't mean anybody did anything wrong. It's just the fact of the matter. So, working on being open to that can be actually also a really hard part of the process.
Yes. Oh, I love what you brought about communication because that was a really tough one. It took me about, I'd say about a year. And I created me and my parents, I created a worksheet for my parents with what to say. I'm like, these are validation statements, these are understanding statements, these are non-judgmental open-ended questions. Here's example follow-up. I'm like, this is the order you can use it in. Here you go, follow the script. Because I knew they didn't know what to say, and I knew I needed to talk to them, and it wasn't gonna go well if they didn't have some kinda guide in front of them of what I was expecting. They didn't know what to say. I knew what I wanted, and if that they didn't know what I wanted and couldn't read my mind, it was not neither one of us were gonna come out of that conversation feeling really great. So I wrote a guide, and that's how we started having conversations and changing the communication patterns in the beginning. But it wouldn't have been something that any of us thought of until we realized for a year it wasn't working. We didn't wanna talk about it, then I tried to
Right.
talk about it, they were reacting out of fear and love, and it just we weren't getting anywhere. But it's so important that we begin to make changes where we can with what we can control. Can't control everything. I know my parents would love, love nothing more than to be able to control that those painful moments and get rid of them and take them away and make them happier and better. They would love to control finding me that support that's right for me right off the bat. They would love to control so many things that they can't. So learning to make those changes, like you said, is so important. I'm really curious if you could talk a bit about that change of what it was like from before when you were trying to hold on to that control and you didn't have the tools, and then you started kind of letting go of that control and using those self-care tools and the coping tools, what that was like.
Well, it was, as I mentioned, a very gradual process, I will have to say. Yeah, we had gosh, I wish my daughter could have, put together a worksheet. That would have been very helpful. She did get to the point where she could say for a while, like, and I think this goes to listening too, right? Because communication isn't always the speaking part, it's the listening too. And so being able to hear her say, like, don't say anything else other than that sounds so rough. Like, for whatever reason, when she was like 13 and 14 years old, us saying that sounds so rough was like she could handle that. Like, we there was no, that was a hard period, right? There was nothing else that was supposed to come after that for a while. It was just, to your point, a way that she could feel validated, that we were acknowledging she was having a really hard time without putting any extra anything on the end of that. So shutting up, I guess I'm trying to say, for us parental folks, was literally a part of this healing process, because I think we just get, again, so unconscious. We're like saying all these things because we want to fix it, but none of that helps. So listening, getting the words down about what the person can accept, in that moment, and sticking to it. And yeah, so learning how with my therapist to deal with, it's not that I didn't feel all the things anymore. But I took that into my own therapy. So my therapy was the place where I was able to process, like, all the things that were going on or making me feel this way. And I had to learn how some of my reactions didn't make me a bad person or a bad mother. They made me a human being, and they're completely normal to have, but they need to be processed and worked through. And I think, if you don't have a self-care practice, you don't have good solid therapy that can help you make these insights and understand these things, it can be really hard to move on from there. um but yeah, so learning when to listen, when to be quiet, what to say, but taking all of that energy that was still happening inside me, thoughts, feelings, emotions, all the stuff, into my own therapy, having a place to process them, and then engaging in creativity, because that was helping me, art was helping me process all of my own internal negativity, because I had a lot of the same messaging in me that my daughter was saying. I'm not good enough. I'm a bad person. I do all the wrong things. I say all the wrong things, whatever. Shame says all those things. Some are similar, some are different. But a creative practice helped make me aware of them and then process them. So between the therapy and the creativity and engaging in it often, it helped to start process all of that so that I could be present with her and really not be triggered anymore. Like, I could finally understand, I end here. It's boundary talk. I end here. She's over there. I can be okay even if she's not right now. And in fact, me being okay is the best thing I can do to be a calm, safe place for her, and to, help our relationship grow, rather than the constant sort of the control and the negativity. That's a fence. That doesn't build strong connection with the person you love. It breaks it. And so learning how to I had to learn all of that anew, because I didn't really get that stuff when I was young. And I had to learn how to make a more secure relationship with my daughter through a lot of trial and effort, and error, I guess I wanted to say, but also, again, coming back to that place of compassion for myself, because this is completely normal, especially in light of what we don't get, when we're young, that we need. Like, this is all learning. And so offering myself the grace to know, but being able to acknowledge improvement when I saw it, and like, yeah, okay, it's working now. We're doing better. And all the things really went a long way. And our relationship today, I mean, I just could never have imagined, that we would be where we are and we would have the closeness that we have. And it's just amazing to be here now.
I really just I hope you know how amazing it is as a parent to go to therapy and to learn and to be willing to be there. A lot of parents aren't able to make that choice, don't make that choice, and it's really difficult. And when you're able to set that example for so many people, it's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for all that you do. As we are wrapping up, maybe for a parent who's listening and they're like, you know what? This makes sense. I didn't. I am blaming myself. I'm not having these conversations. I'm not showing up for either of us in the way that we need, and they don't know where to start. What's a piece of advice you can give them?
Well, just to toot my own horn, first and foremost, they could read my book, Bloodlines, a memoir of harm and healing, because it chronicles everything we just talked about is chronicled in the memoir and the many steps we took for our daughter and also for me, because for myself. And I have a free 32-page workbook on my website, TraceyYokasCreates.com, that highlights my 8 main tips in terms of self-care, education, getting support. Those are 2 great places to start. But I guess I would just have to say, first and foremost, if at all possible, is to just be kind to yourself. But yes, to reach out to someone who can help you. We can't most of us, all of us, we can't recognize our own patterns. They're so ingrained, we don't even know what they are. So having someone who can reflect back what's going on with us, I just cannot stress enough how important that is. And obviously, it's complicated. The system is very complicated. There's financial issues. Perhaps seek out places that have sliding fee scales where they have opportunities to not have to pay the full rate. Or just start with a book so you can, and some journal writing. I did a lot of journal writing so you can start to identify things that you're thinking and feeling, and maybe that will be your next step. But yeah, not going it alone. I guess my answer to this is just not trying to go it alone, because there's no reason why you should have to know all this stuff. And having someone who's been in your corner, me or someone else, a therapist, who can just walk beside you so that you're not alone and that there is hope, can be a huge benefit in so many ways. And I should throw out NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, because there's affiliates all over the country, and they have a class called Family to Family, which provides a ton of information. And even more than that, it's almost like a support group, and it's completely free. So there are resources. The first step is to just reach out.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.